everyone. First of all, on behalf of LEAD, Institute for Leadership and Development Studies, and also our partners for this forum, ABIM, IDE, and also Istanbul Network, we would like to thank you everyone for making your time to be here in the forum that we named in conjunction of our friend's book, Islamic Foundations of a Free Society. This was published by Institute of Economic Affairs in United Kingdom late last year, and Dr. Maszlee is also one of the co-author of the book. And on behalf of LEAD, we also like to thank our three panels here. So I would briefly introduce each one of them. On my far right, on my far right is Ali Salman. Is the CEO of Istanbul Network, and he is also the research manager at Institute for Democracy and Economic Affairs, IDEAS. Ali was with Prime in Pakistan, which is the think tank in Pakistan. He was the founder of Prime, but now he's attached. He's based in Kuala Lumpur. And on my right side is a well-known political scientist in Malaysia. One of the well-known political scientists is Dr. Maszlee Malik from IIUM, International Islamic University of Malaysia. And on my left is Brother Muhammad Faisal bin Abdul Aziz, is the Secretary General of ABIM. Okay, so our forum today will be conducted in bilingual, since we have international speaker here, one of the international speaker here. So I hope that everyone don't mind if if you have any questions later, you can also convey your question in Malay language. Okay, so for the start, I would like to invite Brother Ali Salman, since he's the CEO of the Istanbul Network, which is a partner with the IEA, who has produced this book last year. So maybe he can. He also conducted a series of discussion with international participants via online seminar. The webinar. So maybe he can share a bit about this book and also about Istanbul Network. So please.
Thank you so much, Amin. Pleasure to be here. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum and salamat sejahtera, ladies and gentlemen. I think it's a great pleasure and honor to be here to start discussion about Islam and free society topic in this holy month. What I'm going to do in few minutes initially is just lay down a basic introduction of Istanbul Network of Liberty and the background of this book and basic themes. Anything then will be taken up by maybe more discussion later on. Istanbul Network of Liberty, as the name suggests, was set up in Istanbul in 2011. Were you there in that meeting? You were not. But Maszlee Malik has been, since early days, has been with us. Saiful Wanjan, whom probably you know very well, also in Malaysia. Myself and many other think tank leaders from the Muslim countries got together in Istanbul in 2011, talking about the democracy, talking about economic freedom, free markets, religious freedom, personal freedom, in the context of Islam. And there were about 55 members present in that meeting. That was a special meeting of another international society called Montpellier Society, But since most of us in that meeting were from the Muslim countries, we concluded on that day that we should start discussion in our respective countries about issues which concerns Islam and society, particularly from a libertarian or a liberal perspective. And since then, what we have organized is one international conference every year. We have organized 4 international conferences in 5 years. Last year there was no international conference, and this network has mostly existed as an informal network of individuals and organizations till last year in September 2016. After a long registration and legal process, it was formally established in Malaysia, in Kuala Lumpur, as a foundation. So Istanbul Network, the name is Istanbul. I'm from Pakistan, and it is headquartered in Malaysia. Truly embodiment of the global spirit behind this initiative. And its main purpose is to promote and explore not just promote but also explore the values of freedom within the Islamic framework, and talk about Muslim societies in general, within the context of Islamic history and within the context of Islamic religion and code of life itself. So that's very, and there is a website, istanbulnetwork.org. We are organizing our 5th international conference, inshallah, in Kuala Lumpur in November later this year. And the theme is also very pertinent. The theme is democratic transitions in the Muslim world. So this is the theme in which we are already have received quite a number of good abstracts and presentations from different countries. So you will hear, if you decide to participate in that conference, perspectives from South Asia, Southeast Asia, Central Asia, Middle East, Africa, also Europe and USA, talking about the democratic transitions, especially post-Arab Spring, which is very, of course, important events in last 5 years, democratic transitions they have unfolded before us. Which is very no. Let me come directly to the topic itself. The theme of today's seminar, Islamic Foundations of a Free Society, which is also a title of the book. So before I introduce you to the book, I will just present before you 3 or 4 questions. I don't mean to impose the answers to those questions, but I hope that those questions remain with you. That's my objective. We can differ on the answers itself, but I hope that you will see that those questions are important. So first of all, as citizens of Muslim and Islamic societies, in which Muslims are majority, a question which I normally ask myself and all others whom we interact in these discussions is, what kind of society do we want to live in? What will be the features of that society? Do we want a society which offers economic potential for everyone, regardless of the background of race, of color, of religion? Do we want a society in which there are equal human rights available? Do we want a society in which certain classes are preferred over others? Do we want a society in which political freedom is available to everyone? Or do we want a society which is more authoritarian in nature? Do we want a society in which women have an equal role and freedom of social mobility, of work, and of participation in society? Or do we want a society in which there are restrictions on women in any name? So what kind of society do we want to live in? What should be the vision of such a society? And when I was looking around this concept of this ideal Muslim society, I came across a very interesting index you might have heard of. This index is called Islamicity Index. And in that index, similar questions are raised. What is the ideal Islamic society? And what are the ideal Islamic cities, for that matter? And if you go through that list, Islamicity Index list, you will realize very soon that first 30 names in the cities is actually non-Islamic countries. And if I remember correctly, the first Muslim or Islamic city which comes under that list on the top is Kuala Lumpur. Number 32 in that list, but number 1 in the Islamic world. Huh? So Kuala Lumpur is number 32 in that list, but there are 31 cities, more Islamic cities than Kuala Lumpur, which are mostly in Europe, in USA, in Canada, and different other parts of the world. So there are challenges which are there are issues in human rights, issues in governance, issues of corruption, issues of basic education and health not being there. There are so many challenges which the societies face. But you can still say that, okay, if we want to live in an Islamic society, these are the features which we need to adopt. And so this is a question for us. What kind of society do we want to live in? The second question before I want to present before you is that what is this freedom and liberty we are talking about? We are going to talk about free society today. So what is this word freedom coming from? And what do we mean by that? Is this freedom a divine order, a divine product, or a social product? Is it a relationship between man and God, or woman and God, for that matter? Or is it a relationship between man to man, human and social relationship? And again, there are discussion between philosophers on how to define freedom. And I've seen that in many discussion, when we especially hold in context of Islam, the discussion immediately goes to values and morality. And we are saying that, okay, freedom means free to do everything. Freedom means liberalism. That means immorality. These kind of associated perceptions come very quickly in our minds. However, there is another concept of freedom which we will often relate to. Technically, it is called negative freedom, but I would try to put it very simply that this is essentially freedom from coercion of others, freedom from interference of others. So that's the kind of freedom we are talking about. These others can be other individuals, groups of individuals, and governments. So we're talking about individual freedom as the cornerstone of this idea of freedom, which means that that individual is able to make the choices in his or her own capacity without being imposed by anyone from outside. Outside can be an individual, a social institution, a religious institution, a government institution, anything which imposes restrictions on individuals is, in my view, will reduce the level of individual freedom. And indeed, whenever we talk about freedom, we should actually, in my humble opinion, we should talk about freedom only in this context. Whether as individuals we are allowed to exercise the choices we make or not. And the associated concept of responsibility, that's my third sort of point here, is that can we be held responsible for our actions without being free? If we are not free morally, then we should not be held responsible. So therefore, to be held responsible to others in terms of rights, in terms of our responsibilities, obligation to other, we should have that freedom of choice first of all. And only then we can actually define our level of responsibility. So to be responsible, I think we have to be free first of all. And by freedom, as I said, my own sort of understanding is this freedom from coercion of others. And question number 4, which is also, I think, very pertinent to this discussion and the book itself, is that in this context of freedom and free society and Islam, is Islam solely an ethical system or both an ethical and a political system? So if I offer these two choices before you, do we take Islam as just an ethical system? System comprises which, principles, values, moralities, rights of God, rights of man. So this is, Islam as ethical system, or it is something else also, which is the claim of so many modern Islamist scholars, Islamic political parties today, that they say they say that Islam is not just an ethical system, but it is also an ethical and a political system. And to my mind, when we believe that Islam is both a political and ethical system, we run into a potential problem, or we run into a potential conflict. And that conflict arises because we differ in our understanding of Islam itself, each of us. In this room, 25 people, let's say, would differ on what do we mean by Islam. And if we go outside this room, we meet people from different walks of life, different schools of thought, you will see each of us would differ on how to build an Islamic based political system, because the way we understand Islam may not be the same as you or others would understand. So it means that in a society which wants to live in a framework of equality, the conflict can arise if we restrict ourselves to a political system and claim that this particular brand of political system is Islamic and others are non-Islamic. So if we have a choice between these two options, Islam as a political and ethical system and Islam as an ethical system, so maybe taking Islam as an ethical system may be more accommodative for all of us. When we particularly talk about a society in which we want to respect others' views. I'd like to quote something from the book, a short paragraph here, which explains this point. This is from the first essay. And this also captures, I think, main theme here. Stated differently, rather than establishing a free world based on an Islamic understanding of positive freedom, a free world based on a negative understanding of freedom that accommodates different values must be established. And in the Islamic world, nationalism, socialism, and tribalism have all been tried. The only way not tried yet is free market liberalism. And we think that it's time for Muslims to discover these liberal values and to look for support for them in Allah's small and big books. You will need to read this essay to understand what the authors mean by these words. But I think this is important to sort of set the framework of this discussion, Islam and free society. It was under this background then we actually partnered with this Institute of Economic Affairs based in England. The essays you will see in this book are mostly those essays which were presented in our conferences. As I mentioned in the start, we have organized international conference every year, and so most of these essays come from those conferences. You will see essays on political situation. You will see essays on the intellectual outlook, discussion between reason and tradition, free will versus fate. You'll also see an essay by Maszlee Malik about Islamic understanding of welfare. Then essay on freedom of choice as explained in Quran itself. Then economic freedom with respect to women in emancipation. Also a couple of essays on political change and jihad itself. And lastly, Islam and free market economy, which is my personal interest. So what we have tried to do is we have tried to explain some of the basic fundamental principles of a free society in the Islamic context, which for us, the Istanbul network and the founders holds key to the peace, stability and prosperity in the Muslim world and the world overall. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ali, for quite in-depth introduction about the book and Istanbul network. To the audience, that you can download this book for free. It's online. You just search the same title, Islamic Foundation of a Free Society. And besides that, whoever registered downstairs just now, you should get a copy of CD. I mean, in this CD, they include more than 100 free ebooks on free market economy, on the freedoms, and a lot of discussion on political economy. Also, and all of the ebook got a permission from either original author or the original publisher. So we will go to our second speaker, Dr. Maszlee Malik. Just now I just have a quick search on Google about Maszlee Malik, and you can see he wrote diverse issues in the Islamic world, and he also published is it a thesis or a book on the foundation of Islamic governance, which is, I think, have a lot to do with freedom, issue of freedom. And one of the presentation that he did in Singapore is on the increasing religious tolerance and how is it right. So perhaps the tolerance itself can be a restriction to freedom. Maybe, I don't know. I mean, that's what I think. I mean, just now maybe Dr. Maszlee can explain a bit more about
about the subject. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Amin. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Dear panelists, Ali, Bin, Bizu, and respected audience. Actually, the paper that I've written is not about tolerance, it's about the level of intolerance of religiosity that we're living in Malaysia now.
To tolerate, sometimes we have to sacrifice.
I couldn't disagree with that. But anyway, I hate the word tolerance very much, because the word tolerance is not an accurate word to be used when we're dealing with social cohesion and coexistence. But rather the word mutual respect should be used instead. Because when we're talking about mutual respect, there is I think, a huge room for freedom, I suppose, in compared to tolerance. Because when you tolerate something, you're being forced to tolerate it. You don't like it, just like you tolerate medicine. You don't like the medicine, but you need to take it. So when it comes to social cohesion, it comes to peaceful living, coexistence, tolerance is not enough. You cannot continuously hating others, but you need to accept them because that is the reality. No, we have to start with the very foundation of humanity that Islam has instilled, that has been mentioned by Sayyidina Ali. He said that the believers are your brethren or your brothers in Islam, whereas the non-believers or the non-Muslim, those are your brothers in humanity. And in Surah Al-Hujurat verse 13, said that Allah SWT has created human being in many in various backgrounds, races, tribes, and etc., for us to mutually learning from each other. Lita'arafu. So, a great example been shown by Rasulullah SAW, how he dealt with, the Jewish tribes, Ahlul Kitab, and even the non-Muslims, Arabs, Bedouins who came to live in Medina, who came to see him in Medina. The level of respect, the level of love, the level of humane in his relation with them, even to the extent that when a corpse of a Jew, being carried on the street of Medina, he stood up and giving his respect, showing his respect to that. And the companions were confused and asked him, he said to Rasulullah, he's an unbeliever, he's a Jew. A typical mentality that we adopt nowadays. Whenever you heard the word Jew, Yahudi, we would say La'natullah. So that he's a Jew. Oh Messenger of God, he's a Jew. And Rasulullah SAW replied to him by saying that Alaysat nafsan, but it's a life, the appreciation of life. But nowadays we would see people chanting the name of God, Allahu Akbar, and trying to say that they're following the Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad SAW, but they have no respect for life. They're taking up innocent people's life and chanting Allah is a great. and proudly saying that they are following the Sunnah of Rasulullah, which they are living far away from Sunnah of Rasulullah. But anyway, why did you ask me that question? I suppose we're going to talk about this book instead. So, this book is very interesting. So, not because I'm one of the contributors, but it is going to disappoint you. Normally when I got involved, this is, why should I put myself in this great misery? Involving with ideas, Istanbul Network, and IRF, this forum. Because, the word liberal will be frequently uttered. And this is a framework of this book. And the word liberal is taboo, full stop, in this country. But again, when you look at this book and when you try to understand the connotation of liberal that have been proposed in this book, you'll be disappointed. Yes, it talks about Islamic foundations of a free society, but it doesn't talk about free sex, unfortunately. There's no discussion about LGBT. I suppose, did we ever talk about LGBT in our conferences? No, we never. Did we ever talk about, you know, perennialism? But here we call it pluralism, lah. Saying that, okay, all religion leads to one God in different forms, or every prophets or whatever, they are conveying this. No. Unfortunately, we are not messing ourselves with all those topics. I'm sorry, Jais, Mu'ez and Jakim. Okay, free to drink. As far as I'm concerned, in our conferences, we never. Okay. And even some of our friends from the States, some of them, they don't drink. They're churchgoers. But anyway, so, no, we don't talk about that. And when we are talking about liberal here, it's mostly based on economic framework or political economic framework. It's about free market, like Ali mentioned earlier. It's about individual freedom, where nobody or no party or no power could coerce them or could force them to adopt certain way in conducting their life, in conducting their economic life, in spending their money or in earning their money. I mean, yes, they have values, but values is based on their personal choice. They're doing it because they believe that is the right thing to do, not because somebody else telling them what to do and not what to do. And it's about free market. We're talking about free market. Sometimes people have inside their mind, free market is all about greed. It's all about that bloody, greedy capitalists. Rich become richer and poor will be discriminated. No, it's about you are free to generate your income according to free exchange, according to whatever way you like to earn your income. But there are certain regulations to it. There's no monopoly. Monopoly is not allowed. Fraudulence and cartel. The word cartel is very scandalous. Okay, and there should be no, stealing and immoral activities and etc. Iftikhar. Okay, well, whatever. So and you find it shares a lot of similar values with Islam. And when you're talking about liberal, it's also about minimizing the state. Because when the state is too big, it will lead individuals to the road of serfdom. They're becoming slaves of the state. Because we believe that when the state is too big, the state is too powerful, they have a potential to become Fir'aun. Abuse power. Okay. So free market is all about minimizing the state, leaving the economy to the market to determine, and empowering the society. They believe in big society, or what I coin in my chapter as benevolent society when it comes to welfare. They don't believe somebody saying, or the state is saying that we know the best on how you should spend your money. We know the best what people's need. We know the best on how you can help others. No. What we mean by, minimal state, big society, or empowered society is society knows better how to conduct themselves. Individuals were born with good intention. They know how to conduct better. But despite of the freedom of individuals, we do liberalism in terms of economy does believe in rule of law. This is the difference between liberal economy and anarchism, or liberal politics and anarchism. Because normally when you talk about liberal, people have 1,000 interpretation of liberal. You can do anything. They said, oh, you want liberal? Then you can do anything. Anything goes. No, that is not what we understand in the framework of economy. not what we understand in the framework of politics. You know, it's kind of ironic. Certain people, they said, oh, liberalism is dangerous, liberal is dangerous, but yet they belong to certain political parties, in which political parties could only exist, could only exercise its rights within the framework of liberal democracy. Otherwise, it would be a one-party system. Otherwise, it would be a non-party system. Okay. So, if you are already the absolute monarchy, if you are already in a political party, be you a democratic party, be you an Islamic party, whatever, you are already in the realm of liberalism. So it's very ironic when you reject something as if you are working in silo and separated from that reality. So that is what we mean by liberal here. So the word liberal has been mentioned a lot in this book, but then another thing I would like to point out about this book is it's not a religious book, unfortunately. Again, we have to disappoint you. We don't deal with theological issues, although there's one chapter. Yeah, Mustafa Azhar. Azhar also deal with freedom of choice. Yeah, but again, it's not purely theological, because both of them, they are from economic background and they are looking at it from purely economic framework. With exception of Mustafa Azhar, he did pointed out few controversial issues in which I personally disagree, because he's not an expert of that theological issue. It's very deep, and he took it just like that, which I think everybody does mistake anyway. But apart from that, the rest of the book are talking about political economy. Even although we have 2 articles or 2 chapters dealing with jihad, but again it's within the political framework. So when you look at this book, it's about how to bring the liberal political economy realm within, or how to reconcile it with Islamic values. You wouldn't find any purely theological discussion in this book, and you wouldn't find any legal juristic discussion. Fiqhi discussion tak ada kat dalam ni. Even myself, although I'm from fiqhi background, but I chose not to use a fiqhi approach when dealing with political economic issue. It might sound controversial because people say, oh, ini jadi sekular nanti. When it comes to political economy, you're not using your fiqhi. No, one thing we need to understand, because we have this Pusat Kajian Maqasid in Al-Muwafaqat, Ash-Shatibi, when he talked about Islam, he differentiated between 2 things. He said there are realm of ibadat and there are realm of adat. There are realm of muamalat, where it is about human relation with one another, and another part is about human relation with God. When it comes to human relation with God, it's fixed. You need to abide the rule. You need to abide a very straight-jacket regulations. But when it comes to the issues of adat or muamalat, there's a huge room for ijtihad, especially when it comes to politics. I still remember a very interesting book written by the current Prime Minister of Morocco, Sa'duddin Usmani. It has been translated into English, if I'm not mistaken, a chapter of that book. It's about As-siyasa wa din tamyizun la faslun. Politics and religion, differentiation and not separation. Because as Muslims, we cannot separate ourselves from religion totally. But how we inculcate religion into reality, into realm of politics, into realm of economy, okay, we come back to the question that being imposed earlier by Ali. Are we looking at Islam as a set of values, ethos, moral, that guide us in doing our ijtihad, guiding us in choosing the best for Muslims and the best for the community? Or is it a structured, systematic, let we say, ordinance? So, majority of Muslims, majority of scholars, and actually it's not contemporary scholars, even during the day of, even in the classical period, we would have this, the author of Kitabul Furuq, Al-Qarafi, one of the Maliki Mazhab, great scholar. He has written a book in differentiation between Prophet's actions as a Nabi, as a messenger, and Prophet's actions as a leader of a state, as a judge, and as a politician. So, you know, most of scholars nowadays, most of contemporary scholars, when they're looking at it, they're saying that, okay, Islam is a set of values, set of guidance, moral and ethos to guide us in our political, economic reality. But I wouldn't deny the Islamists, let we say, the core Islamists, be them the jihadis, be them the Salafis, whatever, some of them still believe that Islam provides us with a structured system of politics and economies that should be implemented in whatever context we're living in. But again, they're contradicting themselves, because you would see, if you ask them, which political system are you following? Is it the Nabhani, Hizbut Tahrirs? Or is it the Maududis? Or is it the Said Qutubs? Is it the Hassan al-Banna? Or is it, whose political system are you talking about? Whose economic system you're talking about? Even among themselves, they have different models and they have different systems. So, again, in this book, I think it was, who was talking about that? Muqtadar? No, it was not Muqtadar. There's one chapter dealing with the issue of, but never mind, you can read it later. I couldn't recall. Dealing with the issue of how we look at Islam when it comes to the political economic issues. Is it a realm of ijtihad where Muslims are left with their choice to perform ijtihad, to explore new things, but within the epistemology of Islam? Or is it implementing the literal meaning of Quran or Sunnah and trying to impose what have been said by the scholars in the past, 1400 years ago, 1300 years ago, 1200 years ago, and trying to impose it in a totally different reality? Okay, I think that's enough for me. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Maszlee, for another in-depth discussion about this topic. And our third speaker for today, Saudara Faisal Abdul Aziz, the Secretary General of ABIM. The reason why I invited Faisal, because Faisal wrote several articles on Islam and freedom, and one of the title, if I remember correctly, is the revival of Islamism, the future of Islamic revival is in freedom. So maybe, and Faisal, because he's also a young activist, maybe, I mean, young people who are exposed to different setting, different technology development, I mean, so they might have different ideas about how freedom can work in the Muslim world. So please, Faisal.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, Brother Amin Ahmad, acting as moderator today. Respected counterpart Dr. Maszlee and Dr. Ali. Both are PhD holders, by the way, and I'm not PhD holder, so I leave many things about the discussion of today to both of them to discuss in depth. But I will try to give some views about freedom and Islam that we should or we need to ponder upon. But alright, first of all, when we talk or when we use the term of freedom and Islam, it is not just a matter of text or just a matter of something that we have a discourse, but more than that, it is a matter of how do we give life to that term. We give life to the term of freedom in Islam. And one of the things I think that we can give life to the term of freedom and in Islam is to give freedom to the people or to the Muslim to use their mind, because in order to give a life to the people, we have to appreciate the mind that Allah had given to us. So I would like to use one caption. I think all of us agree. Allah SWT prohibits us from downgrading our intellectual capacity, or in bahasa mungkin agak kasar, Allah melarang kita untuk membodohkan akal kita. So if we can agree with this caption, so that means we are moving forward to give life to the term of freedom and Islam. Alright, when we talk about how Allah SWT prohibits us from downgrading our intellectual capacity, let's have a look at in depth through the history of Islam, the history prior to Islam, and the history the day of Islam brought by Prophet Muhammad SAW, where we can see it was a societal transformation. During the Jahiliyah period, there was full of ignorance, maybe intolerant, perhaps we can say uncivilized and closed-minded society all the way. But the period during Prophet Muhammad SAW, after Islam, it was a societal transformation to be more free society, more acceptance. They accept each other, and it is not just a matter of transformation, but it is a matter of how they transform, how they appreciate the meaning of freedom in a society. So by having or by pointing out this kind of caption and history, let's have a check on ourselves. When we become more Islamic after attending ceramah or seminar and so on, when we become more Islamic, more religious, does it mean that we become more free? I mean, does it mean that we become the people who appreciate freedom more when we become more religious? Or vice versa, when we become more religious, when we become more Islamic, does it mean that we tend to be more extreme in tackling the issue, social issues, religious issue, because we are defensive, for example? So as our non-Muslim brothers or non-Muslim friends or newly converted Muslim, when they embrace Islam, does it mean that they got something sort of enlightenment that could appreciate the meaning of freedom more when they know Islam? Or vice versa, when they embrace Islam, they go to jihad, they kill innocent body, innocent person and so on. So let's have a check on ourselves. Supposedly when we become more Islamic, more religious, we tend to be respecting the freedom of choice, or the freedom of the community to make a choice, for example. And let's take an example during the Prophet period, Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, when the companions of Sahabah embraced Islam. It was not just a matter of embracing Islam, but it was a life-changing experience. It was a life-changing experience, on the top of which a gift, they got something gift from Allah as a matter of freedom to live their lives. So let's have a check on ourselves. How do we appreciate freedom when we become more Islamic, when we become more religious in our religion? And that's the matter, I think, on how do we give the life to the term of freedom and Islam. But nevertheless, however, if we discuss about the issue of freedom in Islam, or any discourse mainly organized by mainstream, maybe government, the element or the element of freedom always being demonized. I think Dr. Maszlee has said just now, the term of liberal, liberty, freedom always be demonized. Even human rights defender always labeled as anti-Islam. That's a problem. Yeah, Western ideas, Westernize the community, the Muslim community in Malaysia, not just in Malaysia, but for the world, I think. Instead, as I said just now, Allah SWT prohibits us from downgrading our intellectual capacity. Supposedly, when we become more Islamic, we have to be more open-minded people. We can appreciate differences in terms of academic writing, we can debate each other in a conducive manner, not vice versa. And even that's why as a reason, I think it is must for us to ascertain the real meaning of Islam, because now we have many versions, many interpretations about the definition of Islam, and some could be said defined by the person who subscribing the extreme ideas. So we follow the definition of Islam articulated by them. But some maybe quite contemporary, like Syekh Ar-Raisuni. I think Dr. Maszlee he knows better, Ar-Raisuni and so on. But there is one definition that really appealed to me. Definition of Islam by Al-Fasi, Imam Al-Fasi. He said Islam is a religion of fitrah mu'allal. Fitrah mu'allal means Islam is in accordance with the nature, giving respect to the reasoning and thinking. Because one of the nature of the people, human being, is to think. If you ask somebody to do us a favor, for example, of course, certainly they will ask the reason behind. Because people, naturally, they tend to think, what is the reason behind? Or otherwise, I will not do the thing that without purpose. That's why Islam came with the reason. And according to Imam Al-Fasi, when he said Islam is a religion of fitrah mu'allal, if we read the Quran, any text, any orders or prohibitions given by Allah in the text, in the Quran, comes with together with the reason. And that's why we call as maqasid syariah. And Dr. Maszlee also mentioned about pusat kajian maqasid syariah. It is important for us to analyze the objective of the syariah or the reason behind the syariah. Sadly to say, there is a people, or there are groups of people demonize this kind of term maqasid syariah as if that we are rejecting the text. That's wrong. Because if we discuss about the reason why we perform prayer, for example salah, does it mean that we are rejecting the salah? Whereas in the Quran, Allah clearly mentioned the objective of salah. For example, Allah said in the Quran, wa aqimis salata li zikri. You have to perform the prayer, you have to perform the salah to remember me. That's the maqasid of the salah. So, is it wrong to discuss about the objective of Sharia? To think, to be reasonable person, why do we perform salah or prayer? Because Allah SWT clearly mentioned in the Quran the maqasid of the salah. Wa aqimis salata li zikri. Same goes to fasting, for example. Now we are fasting, alhamdulillah. Allah clearly mentioned the reason behind why we are fasting, to upgrade our level to be muttaqin, to be the highest level among the people. Inna akramakum indallahi atqakum. So there is nothing wrong for us to use our mind, to use our brain, to use our intellectual capacity to understand Islam more, because it is clearly mentioned in the Quran, and it is not a matter of how do we want to reject the text or reject the Sharia and so on. And in fact, Imam Shatibi in Muwafaqat said the importance of thinking the reason behind the Sharia to release human being from the shackles of nafs and to become the best servant of the God voluntarily. We as a human being, we can be the servant of God, servant of Allah voluntarily after we can find peace in our heart. The reason behind why Islam said this and that. And even Imam Ar-Raisuni, for example, in his book Al-Fikr Al-Maqasidi, mentioned or outlined the three important things about how do we think or reasoning the idea of Sharia, for example. First, to answer the criticism of Tohmah. Now, when we refrain ourselves from discussing the thing that I could say contemporary matters to be discussed by non-Muslim, it is something backlash to us, because we fail to answer some of the criticism of Tohmah given by maybe liberals or the non-Muslim and so on. Secondly, litatma'in al-qulub, because after we know the reason behind the Sharia, for example, the reason behind the text, after we use our mind that granted by Allah, then our heart will find peace. And the third is tahsiniyat. after we know the reason why Allah asks us to do something, then we will perform a certain thing in the best, at the best way. Tahsin niat. I could give an example. For example, the quality of prayer for those who know the objective of prayer is different from the one who pray without knowing the objective behind or why Allah asks us to pray. If we know the objective of prayer to remember Allah, then we will perform the prayer in a good way, in the best way. Maybe we will take a shower in the first place. We go to the mosque, for example. We pray at the conducive area rather than just perform just as a matter to abide the rule given by Allah SWT. And the same goes to fasting. If we really know the meaning, the reason behind fasting, by using our akal, by using our mind, for example. So of course, the quality of fasting will be different from the fasting of the person who just abide by the rule or the law given by Allah in the Quran. And touching on the economic or social or political, same goes to Sharia. For example, if we want to say about the controversial issue of hudud, for example, if we know the reason behind why we need hudud, for example, to achieve justice, so we will do our best by exploring, by conducting research, by fulfilling the prerequisite element before implementing hudud. For example, we have to look in depth on the issue of social welfare, economic problem, poverty, the issue of understanding of the people, education level of the people, and so on and so forth. So by referring back to my first statement, in order to give the freedom, in order to give life to the freedom term in Islam, we have to give, or we have to grant freedom for the people, for the Muslims to use their mind. It is a matter how do we appreciate our mind to understand Islam more, or otherwise we will shut every controversial thing to be discussed, and we will just leave any controversial things not to be discussed and leave to the other generation to discuss, and we leave that burden from being discussed. So in other words, it is a matter on how do we appreciate our mind, and how do we give our life to this kind of freedom, and how do we avoid Islam from being manipulated by the oppressive rulers. For example, this if you want to touch a bit about politics, because as a matter of fact, religion was used to manipulate, to justify the action of the regime, the ruling regime. For example, during the period of Christendom, where the Christian theologists, for example, failure to appreciate, failure to give freedom for the Christian community to use their mind. So Christian theologists was manipulated by the regime ruling to justify their actions, oppressive action, for example, and in return they were promoted to be high-ranking officials of the king, for example. So this is the first round, I think. So I leave to moderator.
Okay, thank you, Brother Faisal. Since we don't have so much time, I would like to open questions from audience, and I also have a few questions. But I will let questions coming from audience first, and then we open to our speakers. Any question? You can ask in Bahasa Melayu as well, if any. Yeah, please. Tak kenalkan nama
Sebenarnya kaitan kalau kita lebih ekstremis pada Islam, jadinya seperti ISIS. Kalau ke arah kat Islam, lebih pada sekular. Jadi untuk menangani isu ke arah sekular, apa kalau kita nak deal dengan orang ni, nak nasihat dia ancaman ataupun ke arah kebaikan.
So how to deal with a person, I mean, between extremism and
Secularism.
extreme secularism, maybe. That's one question. Maybe we can collect 3 questions. Yeah.
Question to
Specific.
Assalamualaikum. Question to Brother Faisal. You mentioned earlier that we need to grant people freedom in order for them to execute their function well. Is specifically when dealing with their ability to think for themselves. So when you talk about granting people freedom, does it mean that we need to be in position of power, or specifically how does a layman, people without power, exercise their freedom in order to grant other people freedom? Because as what I understand, if we to grant something to people, we need to be at a status higher than the people that we want to give something. Wallahu a'lam.
Okay, another question. Luqman is now working at the very controversial office, Mufti Wilayah office.
Oh.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. The question is very much related to what Amin just said. What is your opinion, Dr. Maszlee Malik, regarding the government?
Specific to Maszlee?
Specific to Dr. Maszlee, or maybe Dr. Ali and Dr. Faisal maybe can answer. What is your opinion regarding the government-funded religious institution? Is it against what a liberal promotes, which is the limited government, or not? Thank you.
Okay, we have 3 questions. Maybe I can add my question. So as we can see in the global, or I mean local, especially in Malaysia, we have several groups. I mean so-called Islamic groups with different interpretation. Like like now in Middle East, I mean the rulers in Arab, in Bahrain and UAE have different interpretation than maybe the rulers in Qatar, and even in Malaysia we hear almost every other week or every other month, and that even the Mufti were not allowed to preach in certain states. I mean the level of Mufti, and Alhamdulillah that liberal can still can still held a cause there, right? So I believe that this situation is very much related with the issue of freedom, because when we talk about freedom, we always associate with the power that be, whether in the political sector or in the religious sector, or because in religious sector have their own specific power that, and to relate with Malaysia, because the rulers, the king, have the power over religious institution, and we cannot freely say that this religious institution is not dominated by certain people from different groups. So it will tend to shrink the space for freedom to discuss maybe different interpretation about text, or even different interpretation based on established Islamic school of thought. I mean different mazhab. So maybe you can share your opinion about it, and how to move to better situation.
If I can quickly maybe share my responses on very interesting and I think fundamentally important questions. So the first issue, let's say the sort of the religious extremism and extreme secularism, the contrast is there. Now, to explain my position, I would refer to the political theory of violence. The political theory of violence, who has the monopoly of violence? If we accept that there has to be an entity, a state, which has the monopoly of violence, then we will also accept that position that no one else should have the authority or right of violence, right? So is one thing to preach certain ideas or to share my views about issues of let's say dress code for women or Islamic finance, or whether the private the individual groups can announce jihad on their own without government backing. They're all issues, debatable issues. But my view is that we should keep only a government, a legitimate government, which should have the monopoly over violence. Which means that if we talk about let's say I mentioned dress code, for instance. So there are countries in the world which impose on women certain dress code, and there are countries in the world which actually bar or stop women from certain dress codes. In my humble opinion, both are wrong, because it's a matter of personal choice. It's a matter of personal choice that women should be allowed to exercise. So if you take either extreme, I think it's wrong. That's why I think the middle path, the Vastiya, that probably is the right in my view. But absolutely, we should allow no violence on any respect. I just take the liberty of also commenting on one of the remarks, although it was probably Dr. Maszlee is better able to answer that, about religious institution and the government. I think this is also an important one. The only problem when the government exercise controls over religious institution is then, of course, it also becomes a question of power. It's a question of dominance, and therefore I think we should admit that civil society, individuals have their space, and we should respect their space as far as religious diversity is concerned. As long as we have in my opinion, we have the freedom of interpretation, and we are restraining violence. Freedom is there. You can interpret, you can talk, you can educate, but then you cannot be violent. You cannot use force over other to enforce your viewpoint. I think if we can respect these conditions, I'm of the opinion that we should allow multiple interpretations.
Alright, the question about power. I'm not politician and I'm not standing for the next general election. Pengumuman awal lah. Alright, your question actually has something to do with book The End of Power by Moses Name. We have to agree now, as a matter of fact, now we are facing the unpopular of politician. Sorry, I'm so sorry. Okay, now we are facing the era of politician is no longer popular. Maybe due to social media and so on. But what was said by Moses Name, he articulated his research according to politics, economy, even churches, how the mainstream no longer relevant. The institution be deinstitutionalized because of I could say now of the social media. And in fact, we can make a comparison of our country during the era of 1990s of Datuk Seri Mahathir at that time, the then Prime Minister. It was a strongman leadership. It was always a top-down policy. People of Malaysia have to follow, abide by any rules, any law, any policy stipulated by the Prime Minister. But as a matter of comparison, if we compare to now, the era is different. the era of government knows best is no longer relevant. It is over, and now even in fact Najib announced TN50 just to gather some sort of viewpoint and so on, because I think Prime Minister aware about this kind of transformation about the social, where it is not a matter of top-down policy, but it is how the people's power, the people's view to be heard. It is a matter of how any policy, it is a matter of decision made by the people, bottom-up policy. It is not a top-down policy anymore. And in fact, Prime Minister, I think if we live in the era of Mahathir, for example, we can imagine how the picture of Prime Minister being demonized, for example. But now it is normal, like Pamir Reza, to I don't know what kind of caricature that he made to the Prime Minister. So, as a matter of fact, power is powerless. So we can decide our future based on ourselves, based on our own capacity. We don't have to be politician. We don't have to be prime minister. We have to be cabinet minister, because we can decide on our own. Because it is now that said by what's his name, deinstitutionalized. People tend to be even the youth, for example, they want to have their own personal democracy. They want to have their own autonomy. That's why even in fact not only politics, but also it includes the problem faced by the NGO. They want to do something charitable, for example, to help to improve the social welfare. They just do by their own. They gather 4 people and by using Facebook, WhatsApp, without having registered an NGO, for example. Even if they want to have some business online, they don't have to register to the SSM, for example. So even they can be richer, they can be millionaire. Yes, they can avoid from being taxed, for example. So this is an example of a career. So now it is no longer a period of people go to the big company, people be a servant to the big company, maybe have something to do with the book, but they can decide what they want. Okay, on question of how do we tackle the issue of the two extreme, I think the best is about the wasatiyah, the balance between the two extreme. And for me, Allah clearly mentioned in the Quran, وَكَذَلِكَ جَعَلْنَاكُمْ أُمَّةً وَسَطًا, umat wasatiyah, the balance, umat, and there was many interpretation about umat wasatah. It could be justice, the just people, moderate people, moderate and just, balance. But the problem is the issue is the failure on the part of us or the Islamic scholars to address this kind of issue, to answer the issue. For example, when somebody like liberal point out a certain issue, the failure on our part to address that kind of issue, to reply, to answer the issue, make things worse. And that's why even Sheikh Ar-Raisuni clearly mentioned the maqasid nowadays is hurriyah, because the failure of ulama, the scholars, to address Islam as a part of the freedom problem, as a part of a solution to the freedom problem. So we tend to shut the discussion. We tend to have, I could say, outright ban if there is maybe scholars from outside, like even Mufti being banned freely, for example. So the failure on our part to address the issue, to answer the problem, it will make the things worse. And as a matter of fact, we have to know the idea can only be killed by idea. If you detain somebody who holding ideas, controversial ideas, the idea still proceeds, spread in the society. Hujah hanya boleh dimatikan dengan hujah. Okay, thank you.
Okay, before we conclude, maybe any other questions from the audience? If there's no question, I will give one final question, then you can answer and also conclude at the same time. So my question is, if you look back in a few years, few years back, Pew Global have had their own research on the attitudes among Muslim about the Sharia, about democracy, and the finding that I read from their website, the Pew Global Research, they say that most Muslim wants democracy. They also want political freedom, and at the same time, I mean, a higher number of them also wants a Sharia, although maybe they have a different interpretation of Sharia. Basically, they believe that the role of religion should be higher. I mean, to be increased in their political realm. So, how do you see this can yeah and okay what yeah sure.
Just a very simple question. I see there's some confusion between the word liberal and liberated. So I think as Muslim we should be liberated. That's why we have to know, to express our expression, our thinking, our ideas, thinking out of the box. That means liberated. But I think the word liberalism or liberal itself has given the wrong connotation. So much so that liberals, they will think that those things that Maszlee was mentioned, they're very upset not to see in the book, free sex and that kind of thing. Yeah. So I think is there a need for us to relook into that terminology so that there wouldn't be any misconception with regards to the liberated Muslim. So we are the liberated Muslims, but we might not be liberals. Yeah. So I think this is something that you people should think about and maybe can come up with something like. Thank you. Yeah.
Liberated from what?
Yeah, liberated from as in our democracy system. Liberated in giving our opinions. Liberated in speech. Liberated in freedom of movement. These are the things that we should be able to go out of that box instead of being this mentality of psychophantic and also servitude and this sort of things. So that these Muslims especially has to be liberated in the thinking. Yeah, but because the word liberals come from the West when it first started women liberation, so this has become a negative connotation from the word liberal itself.
Okay, that's one thing. Maybe I can finish my part. So when maybe people have different connotation about Sharia, but from the Pew Global Research, they mentioned that the higher numbers of people, I think it's about 77%, Muslims in the Muslim majority countries want, Sharia to be implemented. Although they at the same time they also said they want democracy and personal freedom in a political freedom. How this can work together, because it also shows that maybe what they understand about Sharia is very much synonyms to political freedom and also democracy. Because I always, when people discuss about hudud, I always say to friends before we discuss about whether you want to chop other people's hand or other things, we should remember that in hudud we talk about the rights to life. You cannot kill other people freely. It's rights and property rights. You cannot steal from others. You cannot just break into other people's property. So it's very, to me, this is very the fundamentals that the same. The same fundamentals with Western ideas. But when we discuss about the approach, the practical, there might be different. So I think maybe that is the common ground that we can start. Maybe we start with Faisal. Ali will.
Okay, I could agree with YB Zuraida point of view, because now, as what we have discussed just now, the term of liberal or Muslim liberal or any that has something to do with liberal have been demonized or have been labeled as anti-Islam. So, but it is must for us to revive the discourse of freedom and Islam by looking at the current context as well. Because, for example, I think I could agree with Asif Bayat when he said about the societal transformation from Islamism to post-Islamism. It is a matter of how do we feed the need of the people. People need to be free. As a matter of comparison, why people they tend to be Christian? Because for them, Christian granted freedom for them. Unlike Islam, when they embrace Islam, they have to face some time of some sort of punishment in the first place. Whereas, as I said just now, in the history of Islam, when the Sahaba companions embrace Islam, the first thing they appreciate is freedom. But we, as a matter of fact, we fail to explain the freedom and Islam in the first place, rather than we prioritizing the element of punishment, the duties of the people of the Muslim. So by looking at what was said by Aziz, for example, it was, and in fact it is a societal transformation. People tend to look what they get when they embrace Islam. People tend to look what they get when they holding the idea of Islam. So that's why Aziz came with the term of post-Islamism. We have to emphasize more on the rights that Islam granted to the people rather than duties of the Muslim. And that's why I say it is a must for us to revive the discourse of freedom in Islam. As a matter of fact, now, however, when we talk about freedom, when we talk about Islam and freedom, we always perceive not only liberal but freedom itself as a matter of something that have a negative elements, and we always prioritizing the captive term, limits, had, batas, context, without looking at the essence of freedom in the first place. So if you ask ustaz dekat TV dan sebagainya, even the mainstream ustaz, when we talk about the human rights, when we talk about freedom, the first thing came into their mind is limitation. But they fail to address the issue of freedom, the essence of freedom in the first place. What Islam granted to be a free society. But so this is a problem of I think Muslim nowadays. And if we still continue to be like this, we will become no longer relevant, because it is now an open society, nationwide, worldwide, and we still fail to address the issue of freedom. We fail to upgrade the intellectual capacity of the Muslim and they become more Islamic. We fail to offer something that can upgrade their intellectual capacity of the non-Muslim if they embrace Islam. Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Faisal. Dr. Maszlee.
Okay. I'm not sure which question should I pick up, because there are a lot of questions and I thought it has been answered. But your question, Awang, you did trigger on a very important position of Islam, talking about freedom. Freedom is not being granted by people. God have granted us with freedom. We were born as free men and free women. I still remember when there was an incident during the period of Sayyidina Umar, where the son of the governor of Egypt, Abdul, the son of Abdul, has beaten a Coptic Christian, because he was defeated by that Coptic Christian in a game. So that Coptic Christian went to meet the Caliph, Sayyidina Umar, and he lodged a report. And Sayyidina Umar summoned not only the son of the governor but the governor himself. Okay, dia pakai kayu pun tak tahulah kan. Okay, so the word that been used by Sayyidina Umar when he was talking to the son of the governor said, "Mata ista'badtumun nas wa laqad waladathum ummahatuhum ahrara." He said that since when you started enslaving people, when they were born as free men by the mother. So God has given us freedom. The problem is not with how we give freedom, how we give others freedom. The question is how we should not limit others' freedom, how we should not prevent others from exercising their freedom or exercising their right. So that is the question that should be imposed, actually. And coming back to your question just now, you asked me about state funding religious bodies, religious agencies, whatever. Even the most secular government are funding religious institution. I give you an example. Singapore is boasting about their status as being a secular state. But you look at MUIS, for example, it's being funded by the government, but it takes away its money. And United States of America, they're funding the churches. UK, they're funding the church. I still remember, even in the House of Lords, you have 16 what they call as Lord of Holies. They were appointed from the churches. So it's not about the funding. Actually, it's about the monopoly of the interpretation of Islam and imposing it onto others. That is the problem. The problem, let me say, in certain Muslim countries, if not all Muslim countries, in certain Muslim countries, even those who self-proclaim they are a secular, laicite country, they try to impose their own interpretation of Islam onto others. For example, in Tunisia, before the revolution, or Turkey, before Akpati and what's happening now. I mean, the government, the secular government, they have their own interpretation of Islam, and they impose it onto people. They prevent their people from going to other interpretation. So that is the problem. The same thing here. I mean, the same thing in Saudi Arabia, the same thing in Iran, for example. They try to impose the state version of Islam into others. And actually, the question is not only about the domination of violence, but also it's about the domination of power. I mean, I don't want to sound very Foucauldian, but it is not the right place to talk about Foucault. But you know, Foucault said knowledge is power. It's not that you have knowledge and then you have power. No, but you have power, then you dictate the definition of knowledge. You define knowledge. So that is the same. In Muslim countries, the state, because they are so powerful, because they are so maximum, they are the one who define Islam and the way people should practice Islam, and not the other way around. And it comes back to Sayyidina Umar's words, Mata ista'batumun nas. Yeah? And it comes back to your question. You know, you said why people have that, you know, kind of contradicting choice according to Pew, especially in Malaysia. In Malaysia, you have less people performing salat, but more people wanted hudud. In Indonesia, you have less people wanted hudud, but a huge number of people, they may perform observing their salat. So if it goes not only, it goes abroad, it goes not only beyond Malaysia, my only answer is the failure of state. The failure of state in exercising their actual role. You know, what is the role of a state? To ensure rule of law, to enforce rule of law, to guard the borders, to make sure there's no crime on the streets, to make sure every single individual will be free to exercise their choice and will be safe when they're walking on the streets, when they're sitting inside their house, when they're sitting inside their vehicles. But when the government are busy doing businesses and they're failing their businesses in many cases, and they're busy accumulating wealth, and they fail, they oppress, they oppose their opinion on others, and they ended up oppressing their own people, you have that result with you. And not only that, they're doing that, they're justifying that with religion. They co-opting religious figures, religious authorities, religious institutions to legitimize whatever they are doing. And this is what wrong with religious institutions. It's not about the funding. Everybody needs the funding. But mind you, even the funding, when religious institutions, they are being democratized, they are being empowered, they are being owned by the society, they will be more successful in compared those who are being funded by the state. Look at, yeah? They encourage wakaf. I've written about wakaf, yeah? When you encourage wakaf, you look at Turkey. What happened to Turkey? They have wakaf universities. They have wakaf Islamic organization. They have wakaf humanitarian organizations. Okay, look at our situation. Coming back to your question, who did, Faisal, you did talk about online economy, yeah? Online businesses. Mind you, our society are becoming more liberal in terms of economy, but not the state. The state, although they're talking about liberalization of economy, whatever, including state of Selangor, but actually they're not really liberal in terms of economy, but the society are. Our society are becoming more liberal nowadays. You know why? They don't believe in paying tax to the government. They go for online businesses. Because by doing online businesses, they can escape the tax. Am I right? Okay. Meaning they're being empowered. They started to believe in free market economy. Alhamdulillah. Thanks to Mark Zuckerberg. When it comes to religiosity, when it comes to religion, they are no longer believe in the sole interpretation of religion imposed by religious institutions. Mind me, they can stop even Mufti to go to the mosque in certain state. They can stop 36 pendakwa from coming to certain state. They can stop certain individuals, that PU, this PU, but they cannot stop people from opening YouTube, accessing to blogs, reading Facebook. And mind you, those who are watching YouTubes, those who are reading the Facebook of Mufti Wilayah, their numbers is much bigger than those who are attending the ceramah. Voluntarily, they are doing that by their own choice, without being forced, without being coerced, without being directed. So the conclusion is, actually our society is becoming more liberal nowadays. And nothing wrong with the word liberal. Just like people say, okay, because the word jihad has been demonized nowadays, so we shun away from the word jihad. We change it. No, we stand firm with the word jihad. But we need to explain the real meaning of the word jihad. The same thing when the word liberal had been demonized not only by those who are anti-liberal, but also by those who self-proclaim that they are liberal, the extremists. The extremist liberal, the extremist LGBT, the extremist this and that, secularists you mentioned, they are the one who spoil the word liberals. They are doing everything, they're justifying whatever their whim wanted to do by the word liberal, which in reality they are not really liberal. I still remember talking with a person. He said, he's a liberal, whatever, but he believed in Marxism. By no way Marxism is liberal. But said, I'm a liberal Muslim. I said, no, you are not. He said, why you say liberal? Because I'm a bisexual person, and I am Marxist, and I am atheist. I said, no, sorry, that's not what liberal. And sometimes put the blame also on those who claim themselves as Islam liberal. Islam liberal ini lagi satu ini. They are corrupting the interpretation. I mean, they are corrupting the discipline of knowledge. With due respect of their choice. But with due respect. But the problem is when they try to impose. Okay, extremism in any way is not good. Whether you are Islamic extremist, you are Christian extremist, you are secular extremist, even liberal extremist, is not good. Jalaluddin Rumi used this when he was asked about what is poison. He said, when you're being excessive, you're being extreme in doing everything. That is the illness and that is the disease. So the only way is to coming back to the justly balance. It must justly balance. But people like to use the word moderate nowadays for wasatiyah. I think I rather choose the word justly balanced rather than using the word moderate, because the word moderate, who's moderate? Because the Obama administration has their own interpretation of moderate Muslim. Trump administration has their own interpretation of moderate Muslim. Arab Saudi who preventing women from driving their cars, and who put a lot of pro-democracy scholars and activists, including Dr. Yusuf Al-Qaradawi, into terrorist list. They're saying that they are moderate. Who's moderate? Even for me, the word moderate nowadays is very dirty, just like the word tolerant. So the wasatiyah is not to be interpreted as moderation, but it should be interpreted as justly balanced. Al-qist. The word wasat, it should come with it the connotation of just. Without just, there is no there is no wasatiyah. Okay, thank you very much.
So before we go to Ali Salman for the conclusion, maybe I can add something to what Dr. Maszlee said. Because when people said human rights or liberal is a Western idea, it's actually communism and other things also coming from Western. So when we talk about liberal to a tyrant leader, it's actually the tyrannical action that being practiced by leaders is also coming from not from our. It's originated from other.
Thank you, Amin. Amin ignited a very important thing. Normally when we talk about liberalism, people are pointing out at John Locke as being the father of liberalism. Although when it comes to liberal economy, actually it's not Locke, it's more on Hayek and okay, Adam Smith, etc. Or Ibn Khaldun. For me, it's Ibn Khaldun. Okay. So actually, you know, one thing about John Locke is not as liberal as you imagine. Because the word liberal nowadays, people are, when you say liberal, people, okay, he must be a club goers, mesti dia ni apa ni kaki minum, mesti is not religious at all, believing in free sex like Karl Marx, okay, or maybe he is a bisexual or LGBT. No. You know that John Locke is a very religious person. He's a very religious person, a very devout Christian. But actually, it's not about John Locke. It's about his guru. His teacher, Albert Pocock. He was the one who influenced John Locke with the idea of freedom. And Edward Pocock, who is Edward Pocock? He has been accused of being Muslim in disguise. Okay, you can Google the name Edward Pocock. The one who is Arabist, or let we say Orientalist. The word Orientalist also becoming so dirty nowadays. But is specializing in Islamic sciences. And he was a professor in Oxford. And he has been accused of being Muslim in disguise, whatever. And his specialization is in Ibn Tufail and his idea of tabula rasa. He was the one who brought the idea of tabula rasa, coming from the very idea of Ibn Tufail, the idea of fitrah. You know, Ibn Tufail has written a book on Hayy bin Yaqzan. Amongst, you know, he has a lot of philosophy behind it, including those deviated philosophy, so-called deviated philosophy according to the mainstream. But the most important thing is, he's talking about fitrah. And when talking about fitrah, it's not only Ibn Tufail. When it comes to politics and economy, one of the most important reference in the discussion of word fitrah is Ibn Taymiyyah. Unfortunately, when we talk Ibn Taymiyyah, we imagine about being Wahhabi or about jihad or whatever. But this is the guy who emphasized a lot on fitrah and nature born when it comes to politics. That is why Ibn Taymiyyah never talked about Khalifah. Even in his book about Siyasah Sharia, the very first page he talked about what? About meritocracy. Okay, so maybe our DAP friends are happy to read Ibn Taymiyyah. Okay, I think that's enough, Ali.
Maybe just to add one more book is Thomas Jefferson's Al-Quran, where he mentioned how Al-Quran influenced him when he drafted the American Constitution. And also, I mean, when I was in the United States, I mean, people keep on mentioning that in the Harvard School of Law, there was a verse, I mean, from Al-Quran in the wall about the importance of rule of law. Yeah. So, final speakers.
Thank you so much, Amin. I think after Dr. Maszlee, that's really happened should be like the concluding remarks. But coming back to the first question which I posed, what kind of society do we want to live in? I think this discussion has clearly outlined important features of that society. And in terms of whether talk about religious freedom or economic freedom and political freedom, these are I think three things which this debate has really highlighted, and this should be the key message. Interestingly, the title and the theme of the book is more so on the free society, and less about liberal terminology. This reminds me of a recent conversation with the graduate of IIUM whom I interviewed for internship. and she was asking this question about liberalism and secularism. And she came for an internship, and it said, she said, I'm okay if you say that you're a secular organization, but I'm not okay if you say you're a liberal organization. So that actually sort of highlighted the sort of the perception associated with the word here. But interestingly, the ideas, the think tank, which I also work with, did a survey exactly on understanding of liberalism. In a national survey conducted, it's a nationally representative survey in terms of the ethnic background and the religious background. And the main one of the main finding is that although most of the Malaysians disapprove the word liberalism, yet they do not understand the word liberalism. However, they are liberal in practice. This is exactly what we also highlighted. They are, but they oppose and they do not understand. Therefore, I think there is a need of more and more discussion on mainstream media on these discussions about the words, about the terms, because these do convey important meaning. Maszlee mentioned the example of Sayyidina Umar, and I think the terminology was used as hurriya. And hurriya is an important concept in the Islamic thought also. If you look at some of the work which, for instance, Professor Hashim Kamali has done here in Malaysia, both as a professor of UIAM and then also as the head of this IAIS, is very important. He has traced the word hurriya and freedom in the history of Islamic thought. And the definitions which he has quoted are very strikingly closer to the idea of negative freedom and negative liberty, and freedom from coercion, freedom from violence. It is not to free, it doesn't mean free to do something, it is freedom from violence, freedom from coercion. So that's a very important distinction which he has made and which many other scholars have made. We also tend to support that definition of religious freedom. It's not freedom from religion, it is freedom of religion. So we are not emphasizing, we are not saying that we are talking about a society which is free of religion. No, we are talking about a society in which there is religious freedom. There is not only religious freedom but also freedom of interpretations and mutual coexistence. So that's important. About the history of Muslim societies and democratization experience, and then the preference for Sharia, I think times are changing. If you look at what Huntington said in 1990s, he said that the democratic politics and Islamic politics are not compatible. He sort of gave a judgment back in 1993. But 25 years after his sort of judgment, if you look now, this judgment by someone as a seminal scholar as Samuel Huntington has become irrelevant, because actually most of the or at least many of the Muslim societies have embraced democracy. They have become more political. The extent of freedom, political freedom, has increased dramatically. We could argue whether it's a question of liberal democracy there or not, but I think it also, in my view, there is a history of colonization experience which Muslim societies have over last 200 years, have influenced actually the sort of knowledge being produced in the societies. And I think that's also unfortunately made us think that anything coming from the West should be sort of rejected or should be resisted at least, which is unfortunate because, as also Maszlee was highlighting, these concepts of freedom, of hurriya, of liberty are not the monopoly of West. It's a long intellectual tradition spread over centuries, in which different civilizations have played their roles, and yes, now there is a material domination of, let's say, one civilization, but it doesn't deny the role of the other civilizations which have played in the creation of knowledge. So I think we should, in my opinion, we should not be afraid of these terms. We should embrace these terms, but we should be clear in the definitions. What do we mean by these terms? As long as I think we are be able to able to offer these clear concepts and definitions, and I hope that today's we have been able to make some clarity, and I really hope that we have not increased the level of confusion which the academics and the think tanks are often accused to. Then I think we have done a good job, and we look forward to Book of Asas.
So with that, we end our session today, and I would like to invite Yang Muhammad Zuraida with Saudara Khairul Arifin as the manager here to give some token of appreciation to our speakers. Yeah.